So welcome to this podcast with Infrastructure Victoria and Sustainability Victoria. My name's Elissa McNamara. I'm the Project Director at Infrastructure Victoria, working on resource recovery and recycling infrastructure. And I'm here with Matt Genever, Director of Resource Recovery at Sustainability Victoria. For the next few minutes, we're going to be talking about Victoria's recycling performance and shedding some light on how we got to the situation we're in now and what both of our organisations are doing to take advantage of the opportunities that lie ahead. To set the scene, I just want to briefly touch on our organisations and our roles in this space. At Infrastructure Victoria, we've been asked to prepare advice to the state government on the recycling and resource recovery sector to tackle some of the issues that the industry is experiencing. We're looking at it from an infrastructure perspective and whether or not the right infrastructure is in place to support the industry.
G'day, thank you so much for having me. It's Matt Genever here from Sustainability Victoria. Great to be here. Always good to have a chat about waste and resource recovery. So SV is a statutory agency. We are part of the Victorian Government. We sit under the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. And essentially our role is to improve the way Victorians use resources and how to adapt to climate change. We have a lot of things we can do. There are a lot of functions in the SV Act. We do a lot of work funding organisations, working with local government, working with the industry. But one of the things we absolutely have to do as part of our core functions is to plan for waste and resource recovery infrastructure. So we are responsible for the statewide waste and resource recovery infrastructure plan, which is Victoria's 30-year waste infrastructure plan. And essentially, look, we're really on the same journey, which is trying to improve the way Victoria uses its resources and certainly build a more sustainable long-term recycling sector.
Thanks, Matt. So first, let's talk a little bit about the state of the recycling industry right now. Obviously, there's lots of current issues, particularly with curbside recycling, but other sectors of the recycling market, in particularly construction and demolition, are actually performing quite well. So Matt, do you first want to talk a little bit about the challenges that the industry is facing right now?
Sure, yeah. Look, there's a bit of a confluence of events going on. It's not just sort of one thing, and hence there's no one silver bullet that can solve it all, I guess. So I guess you've got a lot of these macro level drivers like population growth. The more people you get by rights, the more sort of waste that gets generated. And then there's sort of these other global shifts in the way we look at the trade of resources. So typically the Southeast Asian nations, particularly China and Malaysia and countries like that, have been really keen to buy recyclables off the Western world. So Australia, Canada, the UK, the US, in big volumes. So particularly looking at things like plastics and paper. They've decided that's not the way they want to go anymore. And as a result, really, we're sort of left in this situation where we need to find better ways of managing the waste we generate through our curbside recycling system to manage those locally here in Victoria. And certainly with what that's meant is a couple of those businesses have started to struggle, and obviously the most notable one being SKM Recycling, who's recently gone into liquidation, which is a real shame. And that really means that sort of we're under a lot of pressure, state government and local government, to find the right solutions and get new infrastructure in place pretty quickly.
Thanks, Matt. So I'm sure some people are wondering why this concentration on recycling in the first place. Maybe they think that landfill is a great option. But landfill does cause all sorts of problems for the environment with regards to pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. And it's also a wasted opportunity for the economy. When we put materials into landfill, we're wasting precious resources like energy, water, and also the materials that those particular products are made from. So there's a huge opportunity for us to recover more materials and reuse them in different ways, like using glass in our road construction. So Matt, at Sustainability Victoria, you work with a lot of businesses on ways to get more out of their waste. Do you want to share with us an example of a business that's doing their bit to make the most out of waste, and also maybe some of the other opportunities that the current situation presents?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. Let's put a bit of context around this, because whilst certainly there's a lot of bad news, there's certainly some good news going on as well. So we generate about 13 million tonnes of waste a year in Victoria, which is a lot. But we also recycle a lot. We recycle about 9 million tonnes of that. So our recycling rate is just shy of 70%. Of that 9 million tonnes, tonnes, we manage about 90% of that locally. So in terms of sort of the impact of that export change that we've seen, it's about 10% of our recycling market. So you're absolutely right. There are large parts of our sector that are performing quite well. I reckon glass is a really good opportunity to talk about, and it's good that you've mentioned that. There's a couple of businesses that are really making strides in that area, and it's a good example of where government and industry can work closely together, because obviously there's no one solution to this. It's really going to take an industry and government sort of response here. So there's a great company called Alex Fraser, who's Victoria's largest construction and demolition recycling company. They've been around for a long time, 120 years actually, as a business. And one of the things they've focused on really heavily in the last 5 years is recycling glass into a glass sand replacement. And many people might think, yeah, but isn't that a waste of glass? Shouldn't the glass be going back into glass bottles? Actually, it does. So when you recycle glass through a materials recovery facility, you basically get two things. You get the high-value separated glass that can be sorted by colour, and that goes back into new bottles, which is absolutely where we want it to go. But unfortunately, you end up with a stack of other stuff where people have left the lids on, or maybe it can't be colour separated because it's broken too much. We call that glass fines, and typically we haven't been able to recycle that well in Victoria. So Alex Fraser has started this journey about 5 years ago to create a really high quality sand replacement using that glass, and they've really taken huge steps in that regard. They've worked really closely with government, so from an end user point of view, with Vic Roads and the likes of Major Road Projects Victoria and the Level Crossings Removal Authority, and we've helped them to support them in terms of new infrastructure. We've done some work with them on research and development to make sure that they can prove how that sand replacement compares to virgin sand. And essentially now they're at the point where they can sell that into market very, very easily and at high volumes. And so I was talking to Pete Murphy the other day, actually, who's the CEO of Alex Fraser, or the MD, sorry, and he reckons they'll consume about 120,000 tonnes of glass into glass sand over the next financial year. So they are big numbers. That's a really good example, and almost all of that is going into government-led projects as part of Victoria's big build. So a really good sort of closed loop story there for Victoria.
That's fantastic. And it's these stories that we really want to build upon and help make into business as usual as part of our work. So I thought it might be worth talking a little bit about what each of our organisations are doing to make the most of the opportunities that we have. Obviously, there's a lot of work going on in the industry at the moment across state government, local government, and within the waste and manufacturing industries themselves. It's really all hands on deck at the moment to tackle some of the challenges we've discussed and really make the most of our waste. So Infrastructure Victoria is really just providing some additional resources and an independent view to help the government to tackle the resource recovery and recycling performance. A big part of our work will be looking at what infrastructure is needed to support the industry and what is the role for government in supporting that industry. Our focus is on actions to set up a sustainable resource recovery and recycling sector for the long term. As an independent authority, we're perfectly positioned to help government with this advice. We're also looking at how the industry as a whole has been operating, looking at it from first principles to look at to identify what's been working and what is not working well. We're looking at the state of the waste sector, but also looking at what waste we produce, what waste we're likely to produce in the future and what volumes, and whether changes to that makeup of Victoria's waste are likely, particularly if we pull different policy levers. We'll be identifying options available to the Victorian government and also understanding the likely costs and benefits associated with each of those options so that the Victorian government can make an informed choice. There's been a lot of work undertaken in the waste sector in recent years by stakeholders, so obviously we'll be continuing that close work with industry and with government, including Sustainability Victoria, to build on the good work that's already been done, that is happening right now, and understand stakeholder views, issues, and where the opportunities lie that we are best to pursue. We're going to make use of all of this work to make recommendations to government on how we can create a strong and sustainable recycling industry for Victoria. Our advice is due to government in April next year, so that's 2020. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about what SV is doing particularly at the moment?
Yeah, sure. Look, there's a whole raft of activity going on across state government. Obviously, we're not an island here. We're sort of part of a much bigger coordinated portfolio effort that includes the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, DELP, EPA, our colleagues over from the regulatory perspective, and also the regional groups, in particular the Metropolitan Waste and Resource Recovery Group. And I guess there's a couple of things I'll say there. We're kind of looking at it in two horizons. Firstly, horizon one is how do we make sure that we can address the current issues now that SKM has unfortunately closed. And so there's a lot of work going on with all of those 30 local governments that are impacted by that closure, to making sure that we've got the right sort of contingency plans in place, that we can divert that recycling, as much of that recycling as we can, to other facilities, and also where there's opportunities for us to escalate immediate investment to try and get additional capacity going on. Then I guess if you look at it from a long-term perspective, I guess the thing I always go back to is this is a shared responsibility. There are so many moving parts here and everybody's got a role to play. The state government has committed to releasing the circular economy policy by the end of this year, and certainly the advice that IV is producing will be really important in terms of implementation of that policy, particularly around infrastructure priorities and where government chooses to invest. We're working really closely with the community. That's a real key. You know, we see these high profile stories about Australian recycling getting sent back because it's contaminated with things like nappies. You know, in no way should a nappy ever find its way into a recycling bin. So we've got to keep working with the community to know, so that they know what their role is and households know what their role is. Similarly, businesses, similarly industry. There's obviously a lot more investment needs to happen in industry. We need to make sure that the sector can operate safely and in line with regulations and has the capacity to respond. And I guess most importantly for us in terms of our priorities at the moment, it's pointless for us to encourage people to recycle. It's pointless for us to encourage recyclers to collect more if they can't make products and sell those products into some sort of worthwhile market. So that's where a lot of our activity is going on at the moment. We're investing a lot in research and development to help businesses who are making new products with recycled content, and we're working really closely with government agencies like LXRP, who I mentioned before, and the major transport agencies to help them get into a position where they can procure those. So it's really about making sure that we can develop a nice, sustainable, closed-loop system in Victoria, and that's where a lot of the investment is going at the moment.
Fantastic. So Infrastructure Victoria's work, as Matt mentioned, will be focused on what is the infrastructure that's required to deliver on the circular economy policy over the long term. Obviously, we're also looking at what other measures are needed in order for that infrastructure to be successful. That includes complementing some of Matt's work on end market development, so identifying which are the best end markets for us to dedicate our work on improving, so that we can have enough material going through that infrastructure and improving our recycling outcomes. We'll also be looking at the role of government to support the delivery of that infrastructure and changes that may be needed from individuals and for businesses. So thanks for chatting with me today, Matt. I hope everyone has found it useful, and I hope you keep up to date with the work that we've discussed. Feedback will be important as we progress in our work, so please make sure you stay in touch with us. We will have more formal consultation periods coming up, and you can find information on our work at infrastructurevictoria.com.au.
Thank you. Thanks, Elissa. Great to chat to you today. Similarly, there's a lot of work going on. If you want to have a look at what SV is up to, go to sustainability.vic.gov.au, and there's a stack of information on there. So thanks so much.